Have you ever wondered about the people who drive supercars? Who are they? What do they do? Are they all gazillionaires, trust fund babies, crypto moguls? And how do they afford all these cars? Because there's something special about supercars. The aura they give off, the sleek curves, the sexiness, the power, and the exclusivity that comes with owning one. It's like a secret club for the ultra-rich, and having the right car is your membership card. But how can ordinary people become members of that club? I used to watch all kinds of videos on YouTube with one person after another buying supercars like they were gallons of milk. I actually still watch those videos from time to time. But then I got curious. How do they do that? What do they know that I don't? So I did some research, and it turns out there's an answer to that question, and it isn't even that complicated. Once I figured it out, I decided it was time for me to buy a supercar as well. And now could be the time for you to join the supercar club too. My supercar had a $250,000 sticker price. I would never in a million years have dreamt that I'd be driving a car like this. So this video is about the awesomeness of this car, but also about why and how I bought it. Clearly, I didn't pay $250,000 for this car, but this isn't a story about some one-off super deal that's not obtainable to anyone else. I paid market price, and I still got a fantastic deal. How? If you stick around, I'm going to explain in detail how you can do the same thing and why I think you should join the exclusive club of supercar owners as well. But first, let's go for a ride. Audi R8 GT Spyder. And if you're thinking, well, what's the big deal about that? I'm used to seeing Audi R8s all over the place. You would be right, but you would also have missed the crucial two letters that were in there, the G and the T. The Audi GTs were an extremely limited production run of the R8s that Audi created back in 2012. Lighter, they had performance brakes instead of the regular brakes, they had carbon fiber for days, and the power was up to an astonishing 560 horsepower. The entire run of the GTs was so limited that each car has its own number on the shifter. A total of 666 GTs, and yes, that's the devil number, were produced for the entire world. 333 coupes and 333 Spyders. Mine is number 156 out of 333. Most people think that the engine in the R8 came from the Lamborghini Gallardo, but it's actually the other way around. The engine was developed by Audi and then moved over into the Gallardo. Along with the performance upgrades, there were also a lot of visual upgrades to the GTs. The tail lights were all new. In the front, there are some little carbon fiber canards that give the car a little extra aggressive styling and supposedly a little extra aerodynamics. All of the upgrades Audi made to this car and the very limited production numbers added up to a car that at the time stickered for more than $250,000. By far the most expensive Audi ever sold. These changes to performance, the way the car rides, all adds up to a car that's extremely uncomfortable to drive, and where the tech is, well, it's not just bad, it's pretty much non-existent. But this car does have one thing that most ordinary cars don't, and that is if you downshift a little bit, you get this. And then if you put your right foot down, after doing so, you get this. Man, is that fast. I think I left my ears back there somewhere. No other car can do something like that. This is supercar stuff only. And that's why this car was worth more than $250,000 at the time. Now, why is all of this important? Well, it turns out that if you want to buy a supercar as an ordinary person, those are exactly the things that you want to be looking for. Why is this? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I think it's time for us to learn a little more about the theory behind how and why you can own a supercar as well. But first, I just got to do this one more time.
In order to find the secret to exotic car ownership for ordinary people, we need to dive into the pricing of supercars. This may also be the more boring part of the video to some, so if you're just here for supercar images, feel free to skip to the chapter that starts at this time. At this time. However, if you jump, you'll be missing out on the complete recipe for how you can become a supercar owner too. So instead, I recommend you pour yourself a beverage, buckle up, and stay with me. First, we need to familiarize ourselves with price and depreciation and how they are really two sides of the same coin. So much so that depreciation, in a roundabout way, is just another word for demand. Or more specifically, lack of demand. When demand goes down, so does the price, and that gives us depreciation. So depreciation is actually absence of demand. Also, things depreciate very different over time. Here is the depreciation curve for a yummy loaf of fresh baked bread. When the bread is right out of the oven, the price is high, but already the next day the bread is close to worthless. And after a few days, when the bread looks like this, it obviously has no value, because who wants to buy 3-day-old bread? Now, let's look at the depreciation for a Van Gogh painting or a similar kind of masterpiece. It takes a long time, but eventually the price curve ends up exploding with no end in sight. Pretty much the exact opposite of what happened to our bread. So, what does this have to do with cars? We've all heard that cars lose value the second they drive off of the lot, and that cars in general are depreciating assets, meaning they'll continue to lose value over time. Those characteristics are true for most mainstream cars, and to illustrate that, here is what depreciation looks like on an average new car, almost no matter what the price is. Most cars lose around 40 to 45% of their value in the first 3 years, and then gradually continue to lose value until they reach a bottom floor, which is typically the value of scrap metal or somewhere close to it. But just because most cars behave this way, that doesn't mean that all cars lose value in a similar fashion. A lot of products follow the curve of mainstream cars and bread, but products that have generally been accepted as being extraordinary and have a limited amount of units produced behave different. Think back to the Van Gogh painting. Van Gogh is recognized as one of the top painters in history, and the amount of paintings available for purchase is extremely limited. Are you beginning to see where I'm going with this? In the case of supercars and exotic cars, prices typically start out astronomically high, and most often they initially depreciate like regular cars, and in some cases even more than regular cars. But then something interesting happens. After a few years, these same cars often start to look affordable, and I use that term very loosely for now. And because a lot more people now are interested in buying a Ferrari at what is considered a low price, the price decreases slow down dramatically. Since supercars and exotic cars also include a certain level of intrinsic value, meaning there will always be people willing to buy one at the right price due to the magic and exclusivity of the brand, the price curve flattens out at a much higher level than the price curve of ordinary cars. In some cases, there is even an upslope in the price curve after a few years, similarly to what happened with the Van Gogh painting. Since most supercars are available in more than one unit, the prices won't quite reach the same level as a Van Gogh painting, but the price development is very similar. Here are a few recent price curves for some of the most recognizable exotic cars. As you can see, the prices for these cars ultimately went up a few years down the road, and this is the secret information we can use to buy supercars at affordable levels. If you buy the right supercar at the right time, you are virtually guaranteed that the price will stay flat or even go up, or at the very worst, it will drop much less than the price of ordinary cars.
But what about maintenance?
I've heard that exotic cars are extremely unreliable, constantly break down, and cost a fortune to repair and maintain. This used to be the case. Old supercars were hand-built and didn't have the benefits of modern manufacturing technologies. And yes, they used to break down a lot. But these days, most supercars are built on computers and by robots, and many of the core parts often come from much larger lines of cars. For instance, Lamborghini, Porsche, and Audi are all owned by the Volkswagen Group. Jaguar is part of Land Rover, and Rolls-Royce is owned by BMW. The reliability of most modern exotic cars has increased hugely over the last 20 years, and severe breakdowns are becoming very rare. Of course, rare is not the same as never, which is why picking the right supercar is, well, super important.
But you didn't answer the question about maintenance.
Well, this is a common misconception too. Yes, a scheduled maintenance at a Ferrari dealership can be ridiculously expensive, but no one's forcing you to go to Ferrari. Most exotic brands have a huge network of third-party shops that specialize in those cars, and they're much cheaper than going to the dealer. But the best way to lower the maintenance cost is to not have to pay them.
Wait, what? How do we do that?
By buying a car that won't need maintenance for a while and selling it again before the maintenance comes up.
That sounds too easy.
Yes, but if you think about it, supercars and exotic cars are typically driven much less than regular cars. My 2012 Audi GT has 12,000 miles on the dial after about 10 years, so it's not like the scheduled maintenances have been racking up. And having an oil change done, or doing it yourself, should be within everyone's budget.
What about insurance?
Aren't the premiums through the roof? You would think so, but that isn't actually the case. Because exotics typically are second cars and only get driven very little, and because most supercar owners are beyond careful with their cars, the premiums tend to be much lower than the premiums on regular cars. I pay about $100 per month for full coverage on an agreed value policy for my Audi. That's cheaper than the insurance of most of all the other cars that I have.
Great. So exotic cars don't lose value, they don't cost much to maintain, and the insurance on them is cheap. So we should all just run out and buy an exotic car, right?
Yes and no. While the depreciation theory is the backbone of what will allow us to buy supercars and exotic cars without losing money, and the general running costs often are lower than people think, there is more to the actual purchase than just picking up the first exotic you see for sale. In any given market, there are good cars to buy and bad cars to buy, and knowing which one to get and when to get it makes all the difference.
That makes sense.
I've made up an easy-to-remember acronym for the most important things to consider when selecting your future supercar. The acronym is SUCCM, or is it PSUCCM, or, alright, the acronym isn't really working, but here's the list.
Scarcity.
You obviously want a car that's somewhat rare. Most supercars fall into this category, but some more than others. Remember how we talked earlier about that my Audi GT is one of only 333 built? That's a fairly limited pool of cars.
Uniqueness of the build.
High-end options are popular and weird options and cheap aftermarket parts are not. There are always buyers for the best and most high-end cars, and they're willing to pay a premium for a premium car. Here is the build sheet for my Audi again. As you can see, it's full of high-end options. Colors. This is different from car to car, and you'll need to do some research. In my case, the matte Suzuka Grey with black interior is in extremely high demand. A car like this one likely won't be. So make sure you pick the right colors. Miles driven. This is super important and model dependent also. Obviously, older cars tend to have more miles on them, but you want to be at the lower end of the spectrum. Lower mileage cars are always popular and they help lower the risk of breakdowns. It's equally important that you keep the miles down once you own the car. Most people don't distinguish between a car with 11,000 miles and one with 12,500 miles, but they will put a car with 15,000 miles in a different category and will be willing to pay less for it. History. No accidents on the car. Ever. And no salvage titles or rebuild titles or anything like that. It can be tempting to go bargain hunting and get a cheaper car with accidents in the history, but this will shun high-end buyers later. No one wants to buy a Van Gogh that was repainted by a 4-year-old, and saving money by buying a car with less value is always a losing move. Condition. This is pretty much self-explanatory. We're dealing with extreme luxury and or performance cars, and only cars in immaculate condition get top dollar. This is also why you need to get a pre-purchase inspection, or PPI, on any car you're purchasing. Regardless of where the car comes from and who's selling it to you, you need to have it inspected by someone who knows that kind of car well. You do not want to have any surprises during your time of ownership. So getting a PPI is mandatory. What about the like button? Yes, even though the like button doesn't really have much to do with supercars, now would be an excellent time for you to gently nudge the like button as well. Price. Obviously, price is important, but not in the way you might think. You want to buy your car at the right price, but this is not always the same as buying it at a low price. Great cars are priced higher because their value is higher, and that value is what will help you not lose money on the deal. So by all means, negotiate, but don't chase unrealistic bottom-level prices. It never pays off. Timing. This is where all of our depreciation curve talk comes in. You have to buy at the right point of the curve. If you buy too early, the car will still have steep depreciation left to do. If you buy too late, you may end up overpaying or buying into a market that's drying up. The good news here is that, as we've seen, the flatter portion of the curve for supercars is often quite long, so there is usually ample opportunity to get in at the right time. That's fantastic news, but I checked the lint filter in my dryer and I didn't happen to find $250,000 in there. How do I pay for my supercar? This is where we have to change the way we look at the supercar purchase a little bit again. We're conditioned to think about how much we pay for something, but the right way of looking at a purchase is to look at how much it will cost us to own it. This is going to be a bit number heavy, but try to stick with me for a few minutes. As an example, in the US, you can buy a new BMW 430 convertible for around $60,000. Most people will finance their purchase or lease it, which is a whole different topic. And they'll pay maybe 4% in interest on a 5-year loan, which means monthly payments of $1,105. Since taxes and registration vary all over the world, I'm leaving those out of the calculations for the example. If you keep this car for 12 months, you'll have paid a total of $13,260. Well, that's not all. Because you bought a new car, the depreciation is steep at up to 25%, or maybe even higher. That means your $60,000 car now only is worth $45,000, but you still have $48,938 left to pay on your loan. So after selling your car, you have to come up with $3,938 to pay off your loan. This means you'll have spent a total of $17,198 to own that car for a year. Yikes! If you own that same car for 3 years, you'll end up paying a whopping $39,780 in payments. The good news here is that your car may be worth a little more than you owe, so you may get a little bit back when you sell it, which will take your total cost of ownership for 3 years to $30,426. Yay! So we bought a new BMW and we only paid $30,000 to own it for 3 years. Whoa! That's great, right? Wait, it's not? Why not? Let's take a look at a supercar purchase instead. We pick an arbitrary car with a $100,000 price, like an older Ferrari California. This car has depreciated for several years and it's now in the flat part of its depreciation curve. Since $100,000 is still a lot of money, we finance it, but instead of using a regular 5-year loan, we use an exotic car loan that runs for 10 years. I know what you're thinking. Getting a longer running loan on a car is always a bad idea. And that's true for regular cars. But because we aren't fighting the steep depreciation of regular cars, getting a longer running loan is not a problem. All we are looking to do is to lower the payment. The longer the loan, the higher the interest. So on a 10-year loan, we'll end up paying up to maybe 7.5% in interest. But because the loan is longer, a monthly payment is still only $1,187. What? Isn't that more or less the same as we paid on the new BMW? Yes, that payment was $1,105, so very close to the same thing. So now I'm driving a Ferrari for the price of a BMW? Yes, you are. But it gets better. Because we're on the flat part of the depreciation curve, we can sell the car without losing money. So we sell the car after 6 months. Worst case, we sell it for the same $100,000 we paid for it. Our loan has been paid down around $3,425 in that time, so we end up getting that money back. That means we got to drive a Ferrari for 6 months for $3,697. Not free, but a lot better than roughly $17,200 to drive an average BMW for a year. But that's the worst case scenario. If we put in our time before we bought the car, did our research, and found the best available car in the market, we're likely to be able to sell that car for just a little bit more than we paid for it. All that research is worth a premium, so we sell the car for $110,000 instead. Now we got paid over $1,000 a month to drive a Ferrari for 6 months. Try doing that with a new BMW or an old Honda Accord. So now that you learned to look at the cost of a supercar in a different way, do you think you might be able to afford one? There are even people who will help you and guide you step by step through the whole process. The main reason I started seeing things this way and now have an awesome GT in my garage is because I hooked up with PJ over at Exotic Car Hacks. PJ has bought and sold more exotic cars than possibly anyone on the planet, and he has the whole thing down to a science. And rather than keeping all of his knowledge to himself, he put together a course to teach you all the details. And if you're too lazy for a course, or nervous, or both, he even has a service that will find you the perfect car. You can literally just sit on your couch and eat bonbons and just wait for your supercar to be delivered to your driveway. I purchased my R8 through this service, and I've already purchased the service again for whatever car I'm going to buy next. I'm going to leave a link in the description below for PG and his awesome program. And just so we're clear, the link is a plain link. I do not get a referral fee or anything like that for recommending this. I'm just a super happy customer. Alright, That was a lot of heavy stuff. Now, let's get back out to the GT and wrap things up. And so that's the gist of it. If you buy the right supercar, it can actually be cheaper to own and drive than most regular cars. Of course, this is going to require some work on your part. Otherwise, everyone would be driving supercars, and what fun would that be? And while I wait to see how my supercar investment turns out, I'll be enjoying this beauty and making more videos. And when the time comes to sell, I'll be disclosing all the numbers of the investment, both the good and the bad, if there are any, from start to finish of the whole thing. So be sure to stay subscribed to follow along. Thank you for watching, have a great day, and remember, kindness makes the world better.